Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Return to Reason. If you're catching me for the first time, I do weekly political and social commentary videos trying to bring a little civility and reason back to an otherwise chaotic world. So if that's the type of thing you're interested in, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below so you can stay up to date on all my latest content. Today's episode is titled Mudslinging, Hitler, and How We're All Partly to Blame. So a while back, I came across this quote by Eleanor Roosevelt that stuck with me, not just because it was a really good quote, but because of how appropriate it was for our society today. And that quote was this: great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. I think this is not only an awesome philosophy just to live by in terms of the ideas that I have and how I communicate them, but it's also extraordinarily poignant when it comes to our society today and how quickly discussions about ideas devolve into arguments about the people presenting those ideas, often to the detriment of the conversation in general. Because as long as we're just arguing and mudslinging and attacking each other and not actually talking about the issues, we never really move forward. In fact, we usually stall out or even go backwards. And this type of thing is called ad hominem, a logical fallacy that means to the man. Because what you're doing is you're directing your argument to the person who is making it and not to their ideas or argument itself. And I think this is particularly toxic, and it's everywhere, right? We see this in the news media, we see this in politicians. This is a tactic that is often the go-to tactic of politicians when it comes to talking about each other. We saw that very clearly in this last election cycle, right? But the news media does it as well whenever they're talking about particular agendas that they might want to advance or ideas held by those that they disagree with. And as much as I hate the fact that this is a tactic so relied upon by the news media and politicians, I don't think it'd be particularly productive to make a video calling out politicians or calling out the news media for doing this. We know that they do this. This is something they do all the time, and I've made it pretty clear that I hate that they do this. However, I think that the news media and politicians are largely reactionary entities, and they react to the society of which they are a part. So if we ever expect these entities to change how they exchange ideas and how they deal with those they disagree with, I think we have to change as a society first. And so really what I want to talk about more is how we can spot this in arguments that are presented to us, but also how we can spot it in ourselves. Because I think as much as politicians and news media does it, I think we do it just as much whenever it comes to thinking about people that we disagree with. So here's where we're going. We're going to look at 3 types of ad hominem and how to spot it, what ad hominem isn't, why is it so appealing, and lastly, what is our responsibility as people with this information. So the first type of ad hominem we're going to talk about is abusive ad hominem. So whenever someone presents an idea, the person who receives that idea attacks that person instead of addressing their idea. What we see here is person 1, they present the argument, and the other person says, look, I'm going to attack you. You're an idiot for saying that. So I can just dismiss whatever you say because I don't like you. So the example here, sorry for the profanity, but we have a girl who has this sign, I assume protesting abortion, and the person next to them has a sign that says, well, you smell bad. First off, that says a lot more about the guy who made the sign than it does about the girl who's protesting, but it doesn't really address her argument. It just says, well, you're smelly. Okay, well, so what if she's smelly? What does that have to do with the argument she's presenting? So this is very common. It's where you attack a person and say, well, you're just a bigot, or you're just a snowflake, or you're just a libtard or alt-right or whatever, so I don't have to listen to what you have to say. So it's attacking the person instead of actually addressing the ideas that person is presenting. That's abusive ad hominem. The second one is circumstantial ad hominem, and that's where you attack the motives of a person instead of their argument. Usually it's where the person who's making the argument benefits from the argument that they are presenting. So a good example here is from that CNN town hall about gun control, and Cameron Kasky asked Marco Rubio, well, can you tell me you won't accept a single donation from the NRA? The assumption being that just because you benefit from the little amounts of money you receive from the NRA, then your stance on gun control is invalid. When really it's more likely that the NRA and Marco Rubio already had similar beliefs in terms of gun control, so the NRA donated money to someone that they already agreed with. So just because Marco Rubio benefits from receiving donations from the NRA, that doesn't invalidate his beliefs on gun control any more than a Democrat receiving funds from Planned Parenthood invalidates their beliefs on abortion. So just because you stand to benefit from the argument you're proposing doesn't invalidate that argument. I personally support the Constitution. I support the First Amendment. I support the Second Amendment. I support not having to quarter troops in my home, from having a right to privacy, et cetera, et cetera. Saying that the First Amendment is a good thing doesn't invalidate my argument just because I benefit from having free speech. Any more than a person in Flint, Michigan saying, hey, we deserve clean water, their argument is invalid because they benefit from having clean water. And so you have to address the idea on its merit, not on the basis of whether or not the person proposing it may or may not benefit from that particular position. So that's circumstantial ad hominem, attacking the motive and not addressing the idea. So the last one is guilt by association. Again, we saw this all over this past election cycle when it came to the presidential election. The Ku Klux Klan totally loved Donald Trump. They were very vocal about their support. He made the front page of the Ku Klux Klan's, whatever their publication is called, I don't know, Crap Weekly or something, who knows. But the Ku Klux Klan supported him. This was made into a guilt by association ad hominem attack by saying, oh, well, the Ku Klux Klan likes Donald Trump, so he's basically an honorary member of the Ku Klux Klan. And while it is true that he definitely drug his feet a little bit in condemning the Ku Klux Klan and other white nationalists, he did ultimately do that. And that doesn't mean that he was the grand dragon of the KKK or anything like that. In fact, there are probably concentric circles between the Ku Klux Klan and every person in America in terms of the things they believe. My guess is most Ku Klux Klan members drive automobiles. I drive an automobile. You probably drive an automobile. So we share something in common with members of the Ku Klux Klan. That doesn't mean that our ideologies in terms of how we view racial minorities is the same. There's concentric circles between the likes and dislikes of every person on planet Earth. But that doesn't mean that they're all the same, or that we're all the same in terms of what we believe or don't believe. So guilt by association is another form of attacking a person that doesn't actually address ideas. So are all criticisms personal attacks? Not necessarily. So in a good example here is Hillary Clinton cites sexism and criticisms that she should exit political stage. And on the other hand, this is very recently, Claire McCaskill, senator from Missouri, is saying, look, Hillary Clinton needs to watch what she's saying because she is not helping me get reelected here. When the reality is that Hillary Clinton made a speech in India not too long ago, again, condemning people that voted for Donald Trump. And there are Democrats who are saying, look, you're not helping me get elected here. You need to chill out and quit saying this stuff. This is what cost you the presidential election, and you're going to cost us our elections as well. And I hardly believe that Claire McCaskill is a sexist because Hillary Clinton is hurting her campaign. Claire McCaskill is getting slaughtered in Missouri with attack ads. She's getting associated with these harmful things that Hillary Clinton said. That doesn't make her a sexist. So just because someone doesn't like something you do and they have a valid criticism of your actions or of your ideas, that's not necessarily a personal attack, and that doesn't invalidate their argument. So we have to be careful not to conflate all criticisms of our ideas as personal attacks. We saw this again in Parkland. Students Cameron Kasky, Emma Gonzalez, David Hogg, who were criticized, and some of it was valid and some of it was invalid. There were some people saying horrible things like they were child actors, or criticizing Emma Gonzalez wearing a Cuban flag on her jacket, or saying that they're too young, they're just kids, their opinions aren't valid. None of that is even remotely valid criticism. That's not helpful for the conversation. Saying that just because someone's young, their ideas are invalid, I strongly disagree with that. Tell that to Malala. You can't be young and have good ideas. That's not a valid criticism. But those attacks that were wrong were conflated with legitimate criticisms of the ideas of those students. So there were other people who were saying, look, I respect the fact that you had this horrible experience, but your ideas on gun control and what needs to be done about it, I don't agree with, and I don't think they're good ideas. And that criticism of the ideas was conflated with personal attacks and therefore used to invalidate the legitimate criticisms. So not all criticisms of ideas are personal attacks, and we have to learn to separate people from their ideas, both whenever we're giving criticism and receiving criticism, and not just taking every time someone disagrees with us as a personal attack and therefore dismissing their criticisms. That's not always the case. So why is ad hominem so appealing? Why is this a tactic that we look at it or we think about it and say, I want that, I want to use that? You know, why is it so appealing? And I think that the answer is actually fairly simple. It's because it's easy. It's just easier to hate or demonize the people we disagree with than to actually engage with their thoughts and with their ideas. It's easier for us to say, you are a bad person, you are my enemy, and therefore I can dismiss everything you have to say than to actually think critically about your views. So I think this is largely due to just the convenience of it and the intellectual laziness of it. If I can justify hating you, then I can dismiss everything you have to say, and therefore I don't have to allow any of my beliefs to be challenged. So I think it's largely driven by that convenience and that intellectual laziness. Eric Hoffer wrote this awesome book about people and mass movements, and he describes the different elements that are necessary for mass movements to take place. And one of them is hatred. And he has this quote from Hitler that says, "If there was no such thing as a Jew, we should then have to invent him. It is essential to have a tangible enemy, not merely an abstract one." And we can relate to this. We especially see this today, where it's so common for people on the right and people on the left to view each other as enemies and to hate them and to make them out to be these caricatures of exaggerations of their beliefs. You're just a libtard, or you're just alt-right, so I don't have to listen to you, and just attack each other instead of actually going through the intellectual rigor of dealing with the beliefs. And this is so harmful to our society. That's what I've talked about in some of my other videos, of how if we just demonize each other and don't actually listen to each other's ideas, we are never going to move forward as a society. Thomas Sowell gives a talk about a book he wrote called Cosmic Justice back in the 90s. And in that talk, he discusses character assassination. And he quotes someone else by saying the first thing a person will do for his ideals is lie. And then Thomas Sowell gives an addendum to that quote where he says the second thing a person will do for their ideals is commit character assassination or personal attacks. And he discusses the different ways in which these character assassination attacks are harmful to society as a whole. And he says, first off, they're harmful because they silence people. Someone who might otherwise speak out and who might be able to contribute something to the conversation will then be afraid to do so because they see these character attacks and the reprisals of anyone who disagrees with certain narratives, so they remain silent. So it hurts society because it silences people through fear and keeps them from sharing what might be otherwise constructive and good ideas. And it's also harmful to the people who receive the character attacks, because all of a sudden they're labeled with whatever this one broad generalization is, and they're just dismissed. And so they're silenced as well because all their ideas are invalidated through these character assassinations. But Sowell also makes a great point where he says this doesn't just hurt those who remain silent. It doesn't just hurt the people who receive these attacks, but it also hurts the people who make these attacks. He says those who commit these character assassinations are also victims. Once having demonized other people, they really can't go back to square one and re-examine the evidence and find out whether or not what they have been advocating has been producing the results they want or producing totally different results. So they're locked into the vision. They have too much of a stake in it to ever consider doing something different. And what we have here, I thought this was hilarious. Everyone I don't like is Hitler, a child's guide to online political discussion. But this is super relevant, right? Because we've seen this happen. Whenever people call those they disagree with their enemies, they hate them, you're Hitler, you're the worst thing on planet Earth, you can't go back and say, well, actually, they made some pretty good points here. Or actually, they did this good thing. No, you can't do that. You have to continually double down and triple down on your views, because you've now vocalized how the person who disagrees with you, how evil they are. You can't go back and say, I think you did a few good things, because then you're agreeing with Hitler. You've backed yourself into a corner. You have to commit to your beliefs, even if those beliefs are incorrect. And you've created an environment where you can't even reevaluate your own beliefs. Because then if you do so and you find out that you're wrong, then now you've placed yourself on the side of Hitler or whatever other demonized caricature you've painted of those you disagree with. So it harms the entire society because it restricts the freedom of speech of those who remain silent. It restricts the freedom of speech of those who are immediately dismissed, and it restricts the freedom of speech through changing your mind of those who commit the attacks. So ideas are never advanced. They just remain stagnant. We just remain in this stalemate of attacking each other and not actually critically thinking about ideas as a society. So what's our responsibility? Because like I said, I think that just as much as the news media and politicians do this, I do it, and you probably do it, because again, it's easy, it's expedient. It's easier to oversimplify the answers and the character of those who we disagree with and to say, oh, well, you're an idiot, so I don't have to listen to you. Oh, you're evil, you're a bad guy, you're my enemy, so I don't have to listen to you. And while there are people that I do think are our enemies in a broad sense from a cultural standpoint, whether it's extreme fascists or extreme socialism or whatever, by and large, we are not each other's enemies. And we have to be willing to go through the intellectual rigor of engaging with the ideas of those we disagree with, even though it's hard, even though it makes us uncomfortable, even though we have to do it through gritted teeth often. That is the only way we can advance as a society. Think back to the civil rights movement and all the people who disagreed with Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders who were speaking out. If they would have silenced them and created an environment where they could not share openly their ideas about the racial inequalities, where would we be today? We cannot have an environment where we silence or where we just attack those we disagree with. We have to be able to have an open exchange of ideas as a people, even though it's difficult. Because like I've said in the past, by and large, we are on the same side. And until we learn to stop demonizing each other and actually sit and listen to each other in a civil fashion, we're not going to advance as a society. In fact, we're going to continue to regress. So we have a responsibility to spot this stuff when we see it, to not assume every criticism of our ideas is a personal attack and actually engage with criticisms against us, and be willing to separate ideas from people when it comes to the thoughts and ideas of those that we disagree with, especially of those we disagree with. That's all for this episode. Thanks again for watching. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter at MyMundaneMind. Always appreciate your comments and suggestions, and I'll see you next time.